Well, a little break from that drama. Right. It is good to be here again, to see you all, and to be back in the ministries of this congregation. Truly, during my weeks away, I missed you. I remembered you all each day in my prayers wherever I was, and I want to thank you for giving me this time to step away, to learn, to serve, to engage and explore in a variety of life's dimensions which seem to be a little more accessible when you're not in your daily work routine. If you've read the announcement I put in the bulletin this morning, you get a little overview of what I did during my weeks away, but if you haven't read it, you can read it during my sermon in a moment. It was 20 years ago when the Trinity Council approved a sabbatical policy for its pastors, so in this long span of time that we have shared together, I've now had the privilege of 4 of them. And they have been key to my spiritual well-being, and these spans of time, I think, have been key to the longevity of the relationship that we have shared together as pastor and people. You know, the average length of stay of a pastor in the ELCA is something about 7 years or so. So that means congregations go through transitions pretty regularly, and I think when that happens, the shared history and the depth of relationships are limited by those shorter spans of time. But for me and for us together, the sabbaticals that you have given me, I think, rank among the top factors which have resulted in our long relationship together. Perhaps you have your own insights in that, but I think it is a result, and then it results in the vitality of our mission together, which extends this goodness of God to this community and out to the world. Well, if you're wondering what the other views might be, I probably will be sharing them together this fall, and you will have an opportunity to share your perspectives too when all of us together engage in the pastoral succession process, which will begin in September. But for now, know that I'm grateful for the time that you have given me. I'm grateful for the relationship that we have, and I'm so very pleased to see all of you again and to be back with you. Now, we have a very compelling biblical text before us today to explore a bit too. So let's get to it. The biblical story today is one of the more disturbing ones in all of the New Testament. There are 2 main characters, John the Baptist, who was sent by God to be a forerunner to prepare the way for Jesus, and the other is Herod Antipas. He's a low-level ruler in the Roman Empire, in charge of the territory where Jesus and his disciples have become quite popular as they conduct their miracles and healings. Well, as we join this story today, Herod is scared. He's scared because he's seeing more and more people flocking to Jesus and these disciples who are busy teaching and healing in the name of God. And in his fear, Herod wonders if Jesus is really John the Baptist back from the dead. But how could that be? Herod recalls very clearly that he had thrown John in prison some time ago and later had him executed. The biblical story we see today is a flashback to the sordid details of that murder. Who says the Bible is boring? The night of John's death, Herod is throwing a birthday banquet for himself. He's invited the people of status, those who need to be reminded of his power and his authority, and the entertainment for that evening is his stepdaughter, who is actually his niece. Herod, you see, had married his brother's ex-wife, Herodias, after having an affair with her. And that was a major offense in that culture, and John the Baptist spoke out about it. And he spoke directly to Herod and Herodias about it, and that is what lands John in jail. Well, as the girl dances, Herod swoons with delight. And when she finishes, he makes a sweeping offer to her that no parent should ever make to a child. Ask me for whatever you wish, and I'll give it to you. Obviously, Herod was new at this parenting thing. He probably never made that mistake again. Well, this girl, befuddled by this stupendous offer, runs to her mother and asks for help in choosing what wish to make. Herodias, who has hated John ever since he called her out during her affair, sees a chance for her dream to come true. His judging condemnation of her behavior so angered this blushing bride that she was determined to destroy him if given a chance. She wasn't simply content to have John in jail. But it's believed that Herod put John in jail to keep his wife from killing him, a kind of protective custody. But Herod is content just having John locked up in jail. For you see, the Bible tells us that Herod saw John as a man of sincerity and goodness. Herod was happy to listen to what John had to say about God. Well, back to this birthday party. The girl runs back to Herod after consulting with her mother, and in front of all the party attendees says, "I want the head of John the Baptist," and put it on a platter. Where the girl got the idea of the serving platter for the head is unknown, but it sure did make for a startling visual for the conclusion of the banquet. Herod, he must have swallowed hard as the girl's request echoed across this banquet hall. I would like to think that old Herod's head nearly burst as he felt that screeching collision of his values and his morals and his sense of right and wrong all slamming together inside of his skull. But because of this ridiculous promise he had made to this stepdaughter, and because he had to show that he was a man of his word, that he wasn't weak, and because he had to save face in front of all those guests, the request of a sassy teenager was granted. John lost his head. Oofda, huh? Ugh. This biblical story isn't one that you want to read to your grandchildren and your children while they sit on your lap. It's not one of those passages you're ever going to return to again and again to find a sense of comfort. I cannot detect a single note of hope or joy in it. Can you? Rather, this story is about the depths of human depravity and the horrors of how people with power sometimes treat other people. This is one of very few stories in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus is never mentioned. But Jesus is really key to understanding the story, and that, my friends, is where there is some application for your life and mine. There's actually a point to having this horrible story as part of our wonderful worship of God this summer morning. Although Jesus is never mentioned in this story is presented at a point where Jesus' fame and his success is growing exponentially. So Mark is telling about Jesus and that growing popularity, and he takes us back to the events which result in John's murder. You see, John had his own popularity, and John was determined to speak the truth to power, and it results in his destruction. And Mark wants us to know it will be no different for Jesus. To visit this disturbing story of the Bible, the disturbing story of a beheading, is a foreshadowing of Jesus' death at the hands of powerful people. They are people who are fearful. They're fearful and they're threatened by Jesus' popularity and his judgment upon those who use their power to oppress. We still live in a world where those entrusted with political power live in fear that their authority will be challenged. Leaders in this world of ours are rarely as outwardly wicked as Herod, but they're often just as spineless, committed to expediency, willing to compromise truth, justice, and compassion if they think it'll win them some more votes or secure their position of power. I've entitled this sermon Contrasting Banquet, because after this story of the birthday banquet replete with a beheading, next Sunday we move on as Mark tells us about another banquet. It's the story of the feeding of 5,000 by Jesus and his disciples. You see, Mark is a really deliberate writer. He wants us to sense the contrast in these two different stories of different dinners. While Herod's was a banquet of death, we'll realize next week that Jesus offers us a banquet of life. Herod, could have made a different choice that evening, couldn't he? But power and prestige and self-aggrandizement had replaced God in his life. Though he loved to listen to John the Baptist, he would not risk his reputation and the respect of his people in order to spare John's life. See, do you see the application here? Even the warning? We are always in danger of making choices that undermine our faith. and align us not with God's kingdom, but rather with the principalities and powers of this world. Our lives are filled with choices. Herod chose loyalty to his kingdom and the power it afforded him, and he presided over a banquet of death. But Jesus, he calls us to belong to him, speaking truth no matter the cost, working as best we can to bring justice for all, to live lives of compassion and concern for those in need. Jesus calls us to live beyond ourselves. So let us strive to do so every day of our lives with God's help. Amen.